This is not a commercial for The Way I Heard It with Mike Rowe, the award-winning podcast now entering its 10th year and available wherever podcasts are listened to. No, this is a commercial for Mike Rowe's foundation, which has just set aside $10 million to help train the next generation of skilled workers. That money is available right now at microworks.org. It's waiting for anyone who wants to learn a skill that doesn't require a 4-year degree. Electricians, plumbers, linemen, welders, shipbuilders, HVAC techs. America is desperate for men and women with skills they don't teach in universities. And the MicroWorks Foundation is committed to helping train America's workforce for hundreds of thousands of AI-proof six-figure jobs just waiting to be filled. Apply today for a work ethic scholarship at microworks.org or support our efforts with a donation of any size. We're closing America's skills gap one job at a time, and we could use your help at microworks.org, MIKEROWE works.org.
Welcome to Radical Personal Finance. My name is Joshua Sheets. Today is Tuesday, June 30, 2026. And on this Tuesday, I want to discuss the recent Supreme Court ruling of just this very morning on the topic of birthright citizenship. Now, birthright citizenship is something that we've discussed here on the podcast at various times and in various ways. And I will share with you in this podcast my reaction to the Supreme Court ruling, my thoughts on the subject generally, on what I think should happen and why I think that should happen. And I will specifically then focus on the response that you and I can make to this particular subject, depending on whatever your position is to this subject. Now, first, I'm not surprised by the ruling. I think that you are also not surprised. Any thoughtful, intelligent person who considered the case and considered the precedent, I think you had to come to expect this particular decision to be as it is. The reason I say that is because it is perfectly valid to look at the plain language of the 14th Amendment and extract from that the basic understanding that all children who are born on the soil of the United States are U.S. citizens, regardless of the legal status of their parents. Let me start by, and also the fact that this has been the common understanding for basically a century, is something that is significant. Now, should it be that way? That's an entirely different question, but that it is that way is, I think, straightforward. Let me remind you, as I have done before, let me just read to you the clear text of the 14th Amendment. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, there is a good and robust argument to be had on the meaning of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I have not read the 91-page dissent by Justice Thomas explaining why the current understanding, the current legal application of that clause is wrong. I have not read that. But I think most people who are non-lawyers like me, if you just read that, you would say, well, that pretty much makes sense, right? All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. I'm also aware of the arguments about what the framers of this document meant, what the writers of this amendment, what they spoke and what they talked about. It was clearly an amendment that was written for a different political problem at a different place and time. And I think it's quite obvious that the original drafters of this amendment would not have wanted it to be applied in the way that it's applied in the circumstances that we face in the modern era. I think that is clearly true. And I don't think that the 14th Amendment will survive. It might take 10 or 20 years, but I would be very surprised if 20 years from now we were still that the 14th Amendment were to stand without being modified and amended. And I say that because that's been the basic trend around the world in most, not quite all, but in most of the clear jus sanguinis countries. Jus sanguinis means the right of the soil. Jus soli is the right of the soil, and jus sanguinis means the right of the blood. So these are the two basic ideas, the ways that the concept of citizenship are applied. Jus soli means the right of the soil, means that you are given citizenship based upon where you were born, and jus sanguinis means the right of the blood, meaning that you get citizenship based upon who you were born to. Now, jus soli has always been an important component of the New World. And if you understand that, and you understand why it was an important component of the New World, then it'll, I think, help you to understand why I think I'm right with the fact that this doctrine will not survive very long. But historically, most of the countries of the New World have had jus soli citizenship, birthright citizenship. Over the past decades, many of the places that had this form of citizenship have repealed those laws. They have passed new amendments to their constitution. They have restricted the functioning of this. And even today, all across the New World, all across the Western Hemisphere, most of the countries that once offered birthright citizenship have restricted it and clarified their laws as only applying to the children of legal residents. And so there are only a few nations that still offer clear and unrestricted birthright citizenship. And I certainly do not think that this law envisaged a time in which anybody from any country of the world, for about $500, right, depending on where you live, maybe a week's wages to a month or two's wages, could just pop on an airplane and go across the world, have a baby, and boom, have full citizenship rights of that nation. And so I expect this to change in the United States over the next decade or two. I don't think that this is a good and proper law to have in the modern era. I think it should be changed myself, and I think that this Supreme Court ruling will be the foundation of some of those changes. Now, in the past, I have talked about immigration, and I have, over the course of my lifetime, I have basically promoted some version of open borders, just because, in my mind, open borders makes a lot of sense. But I have always caveated that position with the fact that you cannot have two things coexist. You cannot have open borders and you cannot have the welfare state at the same time. And I think that if you look at the American society of what is happening right now, you will see, I think that is true. Now, that's not an original thought with me, but I think only one of these two things can continue. You could have open borders if you did not have a welfare state. And throughout most of the American experiment, that has been the case. Throughout much of the American experiment, you had true open borders, or you had de facto open borders, where it was relatively easy to immigrate to the United States, and you did not have a welfare state. What that means is, when you have a nation of people living side by side, and that nation of people is not taking things from one another, then while you're generally going to have cultural isolation and even outright animus between the different people groups who are seeking to live side by side, the fact that my neighbor is not stealing from me makes me willing to live at peace with my neighbor. If you and I are neighbors, and I'm white and you're black, and we don't really like each other, we don't want to spend much time together, but at least I acknowledge that, hey, you acknowledge that Joshua's pulling his own weight, and I acknowledge that you're pulling your own weight. We can live next to each other, even if we don't like each other and we don't want to live next to each other. And we can do that with a basic minimum amount of problems. However, if all of a sudden I can organize a bunch of my buddies and I can pass laws that allow me to take from you in order to give to me, or vice versa, then we're going to have a problem. And I think that's where a huge amount of the animus comes from in most modern nation states, is because we have established pretty strongly the basic concept of a welfare state. And we believe that it's somehow morally right for some citizens to vote to take away from other citizens for themselves, for whatever reason happens to be the case. That's not a great scenario. And I've tested this, by the way, over the years. Of course, being basically an advocate of open borders, I have had many discussions and many debates. And in every conversation I've had with my interlocutor, even if he was profoundly anti-immigration, I have asked him, hey, listen, let's say that the welfare state did not exist. Let's say that there were a tax rate that was extremely low. I don't know, you figure out what's low. I usually use just 10%. And I said, let's say that 10% tax rate, the maximum tax rate, were exclusively applied to the basic functions of government and had nothing to do with the redistribution of wealth. Would you be willing for your neighbor who doesn't look like you, doesn't smell like you, doesn't sound like you, would you be willing for him just to come and to live in peace and work, knowing that if he's going to survive, if he's going to make it, that he has to pull himself up by his own bootstraps and he's got to make that work? And about 80 to 90% of the time, people are like, that'd be okay, right? That'd be okay. Now, what's not okay is when you have the impression that your neighbor who doesn't look like you, doesn't smell like you, and doesn't sound like you has come to your nation and is enslaving you in order to feed himself and his wife and his children, and is using all of the public goods and is abusing them. And so open borders cannot happen together with the modern nation state. Now, also, I would point out that open borders does not mean free access for all people. So the concept of open borders, if one is to defend it, which frankly, I don't really care anymore to defend it, but since I've been on the record of defending it, right, the libertarian concept of open borders is this. Right? Why should a government be able to restrict the free movement of a non-criminal person? And how could a government bureaucrat decide what is the ideal number of residents to have within the borders of that place? So that's the basic argument. How could a bureaucrat possibly figure out how many people should live in this zip code? Imagine that we take the nation of the United States and imagine that we today immediately close the doors and there's no immigration whatsoever into the United States, right? People can leave, but nobody new can come in. Well, in that situation, that still doesn't solve all the problems, right? Because you still have giant clusters of people in some places and smaller numbers of people in other places. So how can a bureaucrat figure out how many people should live in this zip code versus the other zip code? The answer is they can't, right? That's a form of central planning. And so you can't figure that out. And so what you do is you basically let the free market figure that out. And that's the argument for open borders. So if you were going to have open borders, you would basically have people who were going to live in a place, and the people and the workers and the employers and whatnot would naturally figure it out with the basic sorting mechanisms of the open market. That's the argument in favor of open borders. And it makes a lot of logical sense. Now, in order for it to work, however, you can't have the welfare state, as I have previously said. You also cannot have quick access to things like voting rights. And so one of the great problems I think that we have in the United States is that we have given suffrage to far too many people. And so I'm skeptical that the entire concept of democracy can continue in its current status. And I would like to roll back democracy by, somewhere between 40 to 60%. Because when you have the concept of a welfare state where it's part of the duty of government to take from some and give to others for whatever, noble reasons are stated, and when that can be done through voting, you're going to wind up with a mess. You're going to wind up with an enormous mess. And eventually that's going to collapse. And if you look at a place like New York City, right? So just this week, Mayor Mamdani accomplished his stated goal of freezing rents in New York City. You will see the impact of that over the coming years and over the coming decades. And that all of the takers in New York City were able to get together and were able to organize themselves, and they are now able to take from the productive class. And so therefore, the productive class is going to either protect itself in some way. So this is where you'll have landlords who will continually take apartments off the market. They won't rent from markets. They won't build new apartments. And then those who can will get out, right? Those who can will sell their holdings and they will move somewhere else. If they can't sell their holdings, they will put them on ice and they will go somewhere else. And so there's just not a world in which an intelligent producer is going to consider New York City as a prime location. Anybody who goes to New York City as a producer is just there with one foot, right? They're not going to commit to the place. They're not going to commit to the city. They're just there with one foot in to make some money and get out. And they're going to keep their assets in Florida. They're going to keep as much of their business in Texas as they can. They're going to keep some of their stuff offshore. They're not going to fully commit to New York City because you have a world that is controlled by takers. And this is the great problem with democracy. I don't know how you solve it. The American framers clearly saw the problem, which is why the right to vote was extremely restricted, and it ought to be that way. And so I don't think the United States survives with anything like its historic strength in a world of mass suffrage. It just doesn't work. Time will tell what happens. It could be that suffrage is pulled back. That seems less likely. I don't know what will happen. Again, I'll get to how you protect yourself from this in a moment. My point was that, in theory, open borders could exist if it were to exist without a welfare state. But since we have chosen the welfare state, until or unless the welfare state goes bankrupt, which is the most likely outcome, or until or unless the people of the United States become well-educated and become a virtuous people that is willing to vote against larceny and to consciously choose not to engage in larceny, then we're going to continue to have what we have. Now, you put these issues together, and to be clear, I am infuriated with the current status of the American society, right? The American society is full of criminals and of takers who have come in with massive open borders through a variety of scams and schemes. They have not been rooted out, and these takers are a cancer on the American society. The levels of fraud, the abuse of the American system, it is absolutely disgusting, and it should be changed. And it's an important moment to see whether or not the U.S. government will uphold its laws. Will it enforce its laws, and will it properly restrict the criminal behavior? Will their assets be confiscated? Will the people be imprisoned? Will the people be expelled? Will the worst criminals be executed? That is the basic covenant that a government has to have with its people. And if the government will not uphold its end of the covenant, then the people will change it out for a different government, right? And that is really, really important, because citizenship truly means it is, as I was reading a post by Senator Eric Schmidt. He made this statement, right? Citizenship is the covenantal bond between a nation and its people. And if the rulers will not uphold the covenant, then the people will not uphold the rulers. And so I think we're clearly at a point of crisis, right, where the many of the rulers are not upholding their covenant with the people, and the people are looking for peaceful solutions. And I pray we continue to muddle through with peaceful solutions, but that the rulers will do their job. I don't have a lot of confidence that they will, but they might. So the point is that you and I can wish as much as we would like that maybe, wouldn't it be amazing if birthright citizenship were abolished? But if birthright citizenship were abolished, that would not solve the problem, because there's still a host of other issues. And at its core, you have this tension between immigration, the welfare state, and mass levels of fraud, right? The huge swaths of the people who take advantage of the immigration laws of the United States to come to the nation illegally, to cross the borders illegally. I think, by the way, it's entirely understandable why they would do that. But it's also completely incompatible with American society, because American society is and has always been built upon the concept of self-government. The basic idea is that you and I are free men. We are able to rule ourselves. And because we are able to rule ourselves, then we are able to have a representative democracy, a democratic republic. And we are able to exercise that on an ongoing basis because we are responsible people. And all of that begins upon the fact that you and I are able to govern ourselves to consistently follow the law. And I do not need threats of imprisonment or threats of fines in order to follow the law. I follow the law regardless of those things. Now, those threats of imprisonment, threats of and fines, etc., are certainly important because in my weaker moments, I might be tempted to steal from my neighbor. I might be tempted to wrong him in some way. And so having the menacing arm of the law there, where the government is fulfilling its God-given mandate to punish the evildoer, that is a really good thing for me in my weaker moments, because there may be times in my life where I might be tempted to break that. But on the whole, for the most part, I'm not going to do that. However, the people coming to the United States, especially those who do so illegally and do not follow the law, on their initial entrance, they have demonstrated that they are unworthy of self-government. They do not have the ability to govern themselves because they have no respect for the law. They have no respect for the custom. And that is what is at its core of eroding American strength and the American population. So I think when you wrap all these things up, you can understand the frustration that people have with the 14th Amendment because it seems and feels like a very, it's like rubbing salt into the wound, right? Not only did you not follow the law to come here, but now once you're here, you're just somehow going to magically get the same rights and abilities as I have, the same franchise that I have. And you know you're screwed when you know that those people have the same right to vote as I do. Say nothing of whether or not illegal residents, illegal aliens vote in other ways, and if places that give sanctuary to illegal aliens gain political power because of it. So these things are all wrapped together. My point is this particular Supreme Court decision was fairly obvious. We'll see what happens in the days to come. I don't think we're a virtuous enough people on the whole to actually make much change. And until we become a virtuous and God-fearing people who demonstrate ourselves capable of self-government, then I think we're going to continue to be ruled over by tyrants and foreigners. That's what we deserve by being a non-virtuous people. And so we have to exercise our virtue muscles. We have to stay calm, and we have to work within the bonds of virtue and do our very best within that system. It's very possible, by the way. I don't know. I have no crystal ball for the future. Here's the best solutions that I have for you. Okay, as I've thought about these problems, and I basically made my peace with the collapse of the United States about a decade ago. I don't think that collapse is ever the right word, by the way, because that when you talk about collapse, it's not that it's never the right word, just that it's usually not the right word. When you discuss the word collapse, I think you have the idea that somehow there's going to be some marked moment in time where all of a sudden all the rules are going to go off, right? And this happens, I think men often just wish for the collapse because somehow in the collapse I would automatically be able to do all the things that I can't do now, right? I would be able, if the rules were pulled off, I would be just able to do everything I can. I thought that way when I was younger, right? I still enjoy it. I don't read much of them anymore, but I used to enjoy reading kind of dystopian prepper fiction. And you think about, I forget some of the names, right? You think about where there's some EMP blast or something that happens, and you think all of a sudden when that EMP blast happens, and it's clear that there's no one here to save me, it's clear that the government's not coming to solve my problem for me, then I'm going to have the virtue to be a leader. Then I'm going to be able to get my community together and solve all the problems. Now, in the meantime, I've never been able to get a school board, proposal changed in my local area. I've never run for office. I've never been able to organize a coalition of my neighbors to fix the sidewalks. I've never been able to figure out how to end crime in my town. But then when the collapse happens, then I'll be able to do that. It's just a fantasy, right? It's all fake. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. And the collapse isn't going to come. One of the lessons I learned from COVID was how difficult it was to know where we were in the scenario, right? I'd spent years thinking about a flu pandemic, and you think, man, it's going to be obvious that the flu pandemic is here. It's going to be obvious that this is the big deal. The amount of normalcy bias I had through the COVID pandemic was shocking to me. And the prevarications that I continually underwent, I could never quite figure out where we were. And so that experience has fully disabused me of the idea that somehow there's just going to be one day where it's, this, and then the other day where it's the other thing. That's not going to happen. What's much more likely is just pain, right? Slow, grinding pain and a general ongoing dysfunction. And that dysfunction just basically continues through for a long period of time. And so I don't like to use the word collapse from that perspective. That said, I made my general piece about a decade ago with the possibility of, I don't know what word to use, right? If I'm not going to use the word collapse, American decline. And, in a world of American decline, that sucks, right? So what do I do about it, right? If it were to happen, I will end on a hopeful note as to reasons why I don't think this has to be American decline. But as I've worked on this, I've come to believe that basically there are three potential pathways to a new and improved situation. Pathway number one is the pathway of a network. So I think this is a three-legged stool. There are three basic things that you and I can do that will potentially insulate you from the majority of the problems that are happening. The first one, by far the most important, is your personal network. Your personal network can solve a significant majority of the problems that you will ever face. And the fact that you don't have a network should be the most fear-inducing thing that you face. When something goes wrong, you need to have a community of people that you can call on. And that community it's not likely to be successful if it's just formed ad hoc. It's only likely to be successful if it has already existed and has already worked through a period of times. Let's imagine that you get the news today, right? That your company is laying off 10% of its workforce, right? Your company is laying off 10% of its workforce, and your CEO has decided to file, 8,000 new H-1B visa applications to replace you. Do you think that your family will be able to eat next month by your somehow staging a political revolution and ending that? It's not going to happen. The H-1B visa applicants are going to get in because they have a community, right? They have a bunch of other H-1B people who will hire them, right? There are certain ethnic groups that you just see that you hire one of these people, and within a few years, your entire workforce is exactly that ethnic group. The amount of in-group preference from some people around the world is just absolutely shocking. And so you know that if your company is hiring somebody from this ethnic group, you know that it's just going to spread across the country. Across the company. Well, guess what? That's just the actual application of all of those pre-existing clans, right? Those pre-existing clans, those communities, those extended families. That's why you have these concepts, right? That's why you have chain migration. That's why you have this idea that has existed throughout time, because those communities actually have a functional clan. They know that they are committed to one another no matter what. And this can be for good, or it can be for evil. One of the things that is just my favorite horrific example of this was in reading the rape inquiry, the Pakistani rape gang inquiry in England. I'm not going to cite the number because it was just a shocking number, but there was, in some of the court records of the Pakistani rape gangs, there was a record of somebody who raped one of the Pakistani guys who raped an English girl, and then all of his cousins, he called all of his cousins, and they all came in and raped the same girl. And I thought to myself, like, let's imagine that I were capable of committing that kind of evil. Let's just imagine it, right? So I imagined that I did that. I thought, who could I tell about that? Who could I tell? There's nobody that I know that I could tell that I have committed that evil, where none of my friends, none of my family, the least that my friends and family, anyone that I know would do, would be to call the police. That would be the least thing. I think there's a good chance that I have good half dozen friends who would literally, many of them would arrest me themselves. A good portion of them would probably shoot me themselves because of that. Because of how horrific that evil is. Right? I can't even imagine knowing somebody who I would ever tell about that kind of sin, that kind of evil. And yet you have these groups of Pakistanis in Britain who were able to call many, many cousins and friends, and everybody gets together and does the same thing, right? That's a clan network. That's how a clan network works. And you and I don't have that because we haven't built it, right? You and I, we spend most of our time arguing with the people we're closest to. Right? My natural instinct is to find the people that I'm the closest to. And instead of building something with them, all I want to do is argue with them. Tell them all the reasons that they're wrong. And that has to change. I don't know why we have that cultural instinct, but that has to change. Is that you have to start building a network. If you lost your job today, who would you call? Do you have a support structure? And most of us don't. Right? Most of us don't. If you have any kind of support structure in the current day, it's about as extensive as your dad or mom, right? Dad or mom, hey, could you buy me some groceries because I lost my job? And dad would probably be kind of frustrated with you and talk about how kids these days, blah, 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 but he might buy you some groceries. But he won't do much more than that, right? We have destroyed our culture, and we basically have no loyalty and no commitment to one another. And therefore, we are all on our own. We're on our own because we have no network. That can't continue. People who don't have a network are going to die. And that network has to be actually exercised. And there has to be some kind of clear practice of it. You know, I'm a great admirer of this aspect of the Mormons. The Mormons do such a great job, right? If you're a Mormon and you lose a job, you don't have anything to worry about. Not only have you been taught to prepare for yourself with clear teachings about storing up, right, and having a year's supply? Not only have you been taught consistently about how to manage money, how to handle money, but you have a network, and you know that there is a network of people in your local ward, right, your local group that you meet with regularly that will make sure that you are okay. And then they will hire you into another job. You will be okay. And it is to my great shame that most people in my community do not have that. You have to build it, right? You have to build a network because the network will solve most of your problems. And so if you do not have that community, you're going to have to build it. I wish I could say you could find it, but unfortunately, we are so decrepit as a culture that you're going to have to build it. You're going to have to be the pioneer who builds it. And if you can't build it, you're probably going to die. So you have to get busy about building it. So start building it, right? Engage in community outreach. Be an agitator amongst your local community, in your local neighborhood, in your local church. Because all of your enemies, they have that. They have the community. Think about, look at the Somali fraud scandals, right? You look at this and I just think, how on earth could it be possible to I just mad respect to the Somalis, right? Mad respect. They came into a wide open system. They saw all kinds of opportunities to enrich themselves and enrich their community. And man, do they know how to look out for one another. They vote in solidarity. They act in solidarity. Man, do they know how to look out for one another. And you and I don't. So the first thing you can build is a network. And that's tough. Trust me, that is tough. But you're not going to make it without a network. The second thing that you can build is the second leg of the stool is that of preparedness. And by preparedness, I mean every aspect of preparedness. So that includes good financial planning, financial prudence. It means having insurance. It means having savings. It means having modest debt. It means having a stable situation. It also includes having physical preps, right? Physical preparedness. So if things collapse around you, are you going to have that? And this has to be connected with a network. I've been watching videos of Venezuela of this just horrific damage there with the recent earthquakes in Venezuela. And you look at that, and I just imagine putting myself in the shoes of the people being interviewed, the people on video, and I just think, what on earth would I do? What would I do? Right? And I don't know that you can actually plan for that stuff. But if you had a network, at least there would be some people who would come and who might be able to put a roof over your head or bring you a tent as you're kind of trying to dig out with your bare hands your family's bodies out of the rubble. And then ideally they would have some kind of prepping, right? Some kind of food stored, some kind of ability, some kind of money, some kind of tools. And so the second tool is always prepping, right? Because if you didn't have the community and you lost your job, but if you had a year's supply, as the Mormons call it, then you would be in a situation where you at least had something to go on, right? You could still feed your children for a year while you tried to figure out a new job. So physical preparedness is the second leg of the stool. And if you had both of those, you're pretty strong. The third leg of the stool, as I see it, is internationalization. And so I wish that citizenship meant something, right? I wish it did. I wish I were living in the world of 1912, right? That would be in some ways pretty cool. I'm not talking about before World War I. I just mean like the America of the turn of the 19th century. Right? I appreciate a lot of things about that, but I don't. And I'm under no illusions that world is going to come back in any significant form probably within my lifetime. Maybe in my children or my grandchildren's lifetime, maybe, but it's not likely to come back in this lifetime. And so, what is your solution? Your government demonstrates almost no allegiance to you. Your government is not upholding its covenant to you. And if that's true, then you are freed from your covenantal duties towards your government. And you have the option to go and look for someone else who appreciates you. That's about it. That's about what you can do. I don't believe that most governments in the world respect their citizens. Governments currently seem to respect basically power. And that's the bargain that people have made. They've said, well, just give us, the whole world is fighting for people. In a world of declining birth rates, one of the most important things is that, remember, that politicians gain power based upon the number of people that they represent. And in a world of falling birth rates, your politicians gain power by bringing in new people who are beholden to them. And so most of modern government is a giant patronage scheme. It's that you come in, you support me as the politician, and I'll make sure you get yours. And that'll go for a while until the money runs out. In the meantime, if you just are trying to live like an honest, virtuous citizen, you're living in a fake world that doesn't exist at this point in time, and it's not coming back within your or my lifetime. So recognize that your government doesn't respect you as a citizen. Your government only respects other governments. So you have a choice, right? You have a choice of what government you ally yourself to. And if you are a producer in any age, there is a time and a place in which producers are appreciated, in which people who are able to contribute are appreciated. And so that's why I talk about and teach about internationalization. And it makes me sad, right? Because I'm an American through and through. There is no question I will never not be an American. But the concept of citizenship, U.S. citizenship, is just a farce, right? It doesn't mean much. It doesn't mean anything. I can't say it doesn't mean anything. Again, I promise not to blackpill. It doesn't mean much. And truly, frankly, you and I probably don't have anywhere else to go. We really don't. But if it comes down to the survival of my children, my wife, the people who I have the largest obligation and duty to, I can find some corner of the world where I can live with them in peace and take care of my children and my wife. If there's a few others around, then I'll try to bring as many people as I can. Now, I hope that I'm wrong, right? I hope, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, I hope that this is just the crazed rantings of an idiot. I hope that, right? I hope that the nation that my children and grandchildren inherit is a grand and robust nation. And I really do believe what I have said previously, that I have the most friends in the United States of America. Right? I can go to almost any place in the world, and I don't know of anywhere else in the world where I can find 100 million people who think just like me. But in the United States of America, I've got 100 million people who think just like me. Is that enough? I don't know. Right? But I have a moral duty to the wife that I have taken and to the children that she has borne me. And that moral duty means that if my government is taken over by people who hate me, and who have dedicated themselves to my destruction, and who have broken their covenant with me and with God, that I have a duty to go to where there are other people who are honorable and virtuous, and follow through to make sure that those that I love, that I am able to fulfill my commitments to them. So I see that as a three-legged stool. And if I'm wrong, and the next 50 years are the new golden age of the United States of America, wonderful. I'm going to be at the head of the line rejoicing. I am loyal. I'm a producer. I am patient. I will deal with a lot of difficulty. Right? But it's not outside of my imagination that 50 years from now, my children might not be facing the same problem. So if it's all fine in my life, I still need to set up my children. I need to hand my children a network, a rock-solid network of support. I need to make sure that they have world-class preparations, physical preps, financial stability, money and trust, etc. And I need to make sure that they have a robust international plan. And I will be thrilled to live out the rest of my days with none of this tragedy occurring during my lifetime. That's my hope. So I don't think that you have to be a catastrophist in order to think this way. I really don't. I think you should. I think you could. Right. This is the next great era of America, and as I have said, I think we're going through a difficult time in the 2020s. I think we're going to build a new political system. I think we're going to build a new economic system. I don't think we know what that looks like yet, although we're starting to get some ideas about it. And I think that it's very possible that we're headed in for another century of prosperity in the United States of America. It's a great country, has so many profound advantages. Wonderful. But recognize that everything I've said can be true for an individual and it can be true for a collective. What I mean is that one of the great problems, especially you learn this when you think about or think about preparedness, right? One of the great problems that people have with regard to physical preparedness is that there's a tendency to only think about big collective issues, right? The EMP blast, the big global flu pandemic, the earthquake. And those things happen. They do happen. But they don't happen with anywhere near the frequency of the individual issues. You as an individual losing your job. You as an individual losing your wife to cancer. You as an individual losing your child to rape or murder. Right? Those things happen a lot. The individual crises happen a lot. And the cool thing about it is the planning that you do for the big collective catastrophe can also help you through the time of personal tragedy. And so everything here is true both ways. And that's why we do this good planning, is that it's entirely possible that the United States will have a glorious century. Entirely possible. And it's entirely possible that I myself will have an absolutely ruinous century. And so I need to prepare for that. But if I prepare for personal ruin, then there's a good chance that I'll make it through in a glorious century within the glorious century of the United States of America. And if the United States of America goes through a ruinous century, I can go through a glorious century with good planning, with good preparations. Because in every country that's collapsing, there's some people who are just really winning, right? You go wherever you want to go right now. Sudan, Somalia, Bolivia. Bolivia is just in a desperate state right now. Venezuela, right? Wherever you're going to go. And you'll find that there's a bunch of people just absolutely flourishing. Why are those people flourishing? Well, usually it comes down to the network. They are connected. They are powerful. They are connected to powerful people. They have a strong support system. They have access to the elites of society. They have access to the elite schools. They have access to those things. And because they are connected and they're powerful, the ruinous laws tend to be applied slightly differently to them. Why do they work? Well, they often have physical preparations, right? Look at Mayor Mamdani, right? Mayor Mamdani. What does he have? Mayor of New York City. Well, he's wealthy. His family is wealthy. He's extraordinarily well connected. He attended an elite university, has profound political connections. Those profoundly powerful networks have put him into a position of power and authority. He has a profoundly connected religious community that supports him because they see him as a warrior of jihad, right, pressing forward. And he has international preps. He holds dual citizenship. His family is wealthy. They hold a huge amount of wealth and personal property and capital in Uganda. And I'm sure they have many other forms of preparation all around the world. And so he has done and is doing exactly what I have described. And so here he is at the head of one of the richest and most powerful cities in the world. And why is he there? Well, his network, his preparations. The preparations, I doubt he has. Notice, by the way, I said network is the most important, right? He may not have bottles of water stored underneath his bed in his New York apartment, but he for sure will never go thirsty in the next disaster that hits New York, right? Because he has the network. But the preparations, right? Mansion in Uganda, family money, extremely well connected, and he has the international plan sewn up. Community, network, power, prestige. The man's a genius. An absolute genius. Not sure what else to say. I guess I'll close with a statement that really radicalized me a number of years ago. I'm not sure it was a decade ago, but I remember when it wasn't a decade ago. I didn't look up the year, but I remember when Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came into power. And she is an incredible politician and one of the smartest people I have ever observed, right? Absolutely brilliant. And she is also possibly one of the dumbest people you ever listened to in terms of knowledge, in terms of anything. But man, she is really, really good. And I forget, somebody sent me a meme and they said, you believe in a system that gives AOC, you believe in a political system that gives AOC power over you and she's the idiot? All right, think about that. You believe in a system that gives Mayor Mamdani power over you and he's the idiot? Or you believe in a system that gives President Trump power over you and he's the idiot? Or you believe in the system that gives President Biden power over you and he's the idiot? Think about that. I don't know about you, but that meme lives in my head, right? That meme absolutely lives in my head. So we're going through a time of enormous political turmoil. I don't know what to expect. The future is uncertain. All I know is that you're better off with some kind of preparation. And the most important is that network, right? Build your network, build your community. I'm doing my best to help Radical Personal Finance be part of that and help friends meet friends and do things together. But you're going to have to buddy up, right? You're going to have to buddy up. We used to have a world in which an individual could make it. That was a pretty cool world. Pretty sure that world is dead and gone. So you're going to have to figure out how to make friends and keep them. You're going to have to figure out how to support one another. You're going to have to figure out how to build a community where there's an intense sense of belonging. And friends, that is not easy. We're not very good at it. We got a lot of work to do and we're behind the curve. So you're going to have to build it. And then the preps and the international stuff is kind of also part of it. But the network is clearly the most important thing. So whatever your response to the news is, recognize that it's probably you can't change you and I as individuals some people might be able to influence an individual, period of history. And if you can, cool, you should do that. But at the end of the day, they're probably not going to write a history book about you or me. But that doesn't mean that your children and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren and your cousins and your neighbors and the people in your community can't flourish. So I wish I had a grand plan for kind of great scale action, but that's someone else. Go find someone else who's better at that. I don't know how to tell you how to do that, but I do know that you can build a network and you can live prudently. You can build wealth. You can accumulate resources. And you can live honorably. And at the end of the day, the end of your life, when you stand before God, if you've lived honorably, you've done what He's called you to do, then that'll be a good day. Thank you for listening. I'll be back with you soon.